Anyway, hello. I am going to talk about team buy-in. And one of the reasons why I was planning to talk about that is we spend a lot of time on my teams talking about how we get full team buy-in into automation. But I think that we don't spend enough time talking about creating just general group dynamics that make your automation work more successfully and make your manual testing work more successfully as well. So I wanted to talk about that all in a general sense. So anyway, hello, I'm Lauren. I am a software test engineer at WillowTree Digital Canada. WillowTree is a company that just moved to Canada. We have four East Coast offices in the US, and then we just opened our first West Coast and our first Canadian office. And so that's been really, really fun for me. I just moved to Vancouver about 3 months ago, so this is my first VanQ. I did come and look at some of the previous stuff that you guys have been doing, so that's been really cool to see that there's such a lively community here. So I've been in testing for about 5 years. 3 of those have been at WillowTree, and it's been really cool to now be in Vancouver. So I wanted to talk a little bit about WillowTree specifically, because even though a lot of what I want to talk about is general and related to testing in general, one of the things that's been really cool about being at WillowTree is that it's a product agency. And I've been able to, in the 3 years that I've been there, work at about 8 different client projects, and then even more internal projects as well. And there have been a lot of different structures, a lot of different technologies, and a lot of different spaces for learning both what my internal teams need to do in order to function appropriately, as well as figuring out dynamics within client teams and figuring out how we can bring our WillowTree process to their teams. So there's just been a really ripe space to grow and learn about how to form well-functioning teams in the past years that I've been at WillowTree. Before that, I was on a nonprofit. We were single product, and it was a lot of dealing with the same dynamics over and over again. So it was really cool to move to WillowTree and be able to deal with and interact with a lot of different types of, like I said, technologies and team dynamics. One of the things that has also been hard, which I think I kind of hinted at, was that everything we do at WillowTree is custom, and we spin up a new project team for every single subset of work that we do. And so we have some structures within the company that make it so that we can already know our coworkers before we spin up projects, but it still is a lot of that, forming, storming, norming that you have to do every 6 months or so when you're put on a new project and you're building something completely custom and completely new. I hinted at the fact that we have a lot of different products we work on. We originally started as a mobile agency, and then we also do web as well, and OTT, and voice. But as a test engineer, we don't specialize at all. So a lot of what we end up doing is really learning on the go and bringing our teams testing best practices and bringing our teams test architectures so that they can help us learn about the specifics of their platforms, and then learning together the specifics of those platforms in regard to testing. So there's definitely a lot of learning on the fly. So by team buy-in, I sort of alluded to this at the beginning of the session, but by team buy-in, what do I mean? This could be really, really general. I really am just talking about the team is committed to quality, The team understands the importance of all the layers of your testing. The team rallies around fixing broken tests or blockers to tests. This is a really big one. They seek advice from their testers. I definitely have been on teams before where testing is very much the end of the road. People want it to be done, and it's not really viewed as it should be as a value add. And some of that is those team members not being as collaborative as we want them to be, but some of that is the environment that we're creating around our teams. And if we work really specifically on creating a good culture within our teams and providing value to our teams, that can start to change and that can start to shift. And even I've been on certain teams where within a couple of weeks, people start not asking questions of their testers and they start asking different people questions, and really relying on them in a way that I was not seeing before. And it's really nice to see. And then ultimately, when I talk about buy-in, I've been talking a lot about, convincing other people to really be invested in test. But what I really want is that the team is committed to each other. And for this to work, you need to be able to say, okay, I'm not mad at anybody else for not buying into what I want to do. I need to also buy into what they're trying to do, and to invest time in the product and invest time in helping them with goals they might have. If your developers want to innovate in some way, figuring out structures that you can use to help them do that innovation. One of the things that I kind of forgot to mention at the beginning of this is I'm mostly going to be talking about, cross-functional Scrum type teams. If you have a separate testing team, some of these might not apply as much to the way that you're functioning. That being said, there are probably some things that I'd be interested to hear if you think that you could apply them or if you think that they would help. Question, does this align with what people thought this presentation was going to be about? Anyway, so putting up this slide, I wanted to know how people feel about this quote. You like it?
Yeah, we use it a lot at work.
Mm-hmm. This quote also resonates with me, and I think that it definitely has a place. One of the things that I tend to think about when I think about quality as everyone's responsibility is that we're stating quality as if it's another thing that people should be doing, instead of finding ways to inspire them to want to engage in quality tasks with us. So it makes, it's a very important concept, and being able to spread that, throughout your team is important. But from my perspective, actually using this phrase can create an environment where people are seeing it as just another chore they need to do on their list of things. So I tend to like to work towards creating teams where we are doing quality work that helps them develop faster, develop smoother, create more interesting things than they thought they could have created without it, so that their day-to-day lives are less stressful, so that they're helping us with our general tasks and we're helping them with their general tasks. So then in some ways, creating the product becomes everyone's responsibility, and then quality is just a way that we get there, and a way that we all work to get there. Bloop. So as I was saying, goal is to create something cool. Well, so this often is my goal when I move on to a project. So it doesn't have to be your goal, and it also is different depending on what our client wants and what their needs are and what their constraints are. But usually, I want to create something cool that's easily maintainable, modifiable, and shippable, and that we help the whole team feel valued. And I think one of the really strong things that I like to stress here is modifiable, because when we are adding in good layers of testing, that's what we're really giving our developers, is opportunities to pivot. If we have really long and stressful regression cycles, then if they make mistakes or if we make a wrong decision along the way, they don't feel like they have that flexibility because we don't have enough time in our timeline. But if we upfront have developed really good testing principles and developed a really solid release and regression cycle, then they feel very comfortable saying, oh, the testers can help me do this. I can refactor if I want to. And I don't know if everybody else has this experience, but like, people love to refactor. I love to refactor. Clients don't love it when you say that you're going to refactor things. But if you already have a system that you've developed that you feel really safe with, that your client feels safe with, they're much more likely to say yes. And that helps with feeling camaraderie within the team, and that helps with reducing frustration when you're halfway through a project and you realize that you did something in a way that was non-optimal. It just makes it a lot easier. So like, stressing up front how that's going to help you moving forward is something that I really like to do when I'm working with teams. Because really, my goal usually is to develop a thoughtful automated test suite that has, a large amount of unit tests, a medium amount of integration tests, and a very small amount of UI tests. That also supplements my manual testing that I'm going to do, usually on the things that really need that creative eye or things that aren't easily testable by automation. And that's always my goal, pretty much, even though I'm doing custom solutions for every project. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Did that stir anything in you? Does that resonate with you? Would you say that those are also your goals when you go onto a project, or are everybody's lives very different from mine?
Actually, not exactly.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Mikhail.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the objective of testing is collecting information about quality.
Mm-hmm.
And communicating this information to stakeholders who either make decisions on next steps like defect resolution or even release.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about quality and about everyone's responsibility about quality, we should clarify what we are talking about. Are we talking about the product quality? Are we talking about quality of someone's work? So
Yeah.
specifically, I just wanted to say that quality of the product cannot be testers' responsibility, because they do not and they cannot create product quality. Product quality is embedded in the product by development team. And so testers also do not have authority to order anyone to fix a defect. And that's why, so how they can be responsible for product quality if they don't have these two important responsibilities?
Mm-hmm. That definitely makes sense, and that's a good distinction between product quality. Wait, what was the other thing you distinguished it with? Product quality and what was the thing you distinguished it between?
And quality of work.
Quality of work. So it's everybody's job to have a high quality of work, which which I would agree with. I get what you're saying about product quality, and I do think that it depends the structure of your teams, because if you're running a cross-functional Scrum team where you're working very closely together on the quality of the code, even sometimes reviewing the code, even sometimes editing certain things, then it can be kind of this collective goal. But I get what you're saying, and that's a very good point and a good perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I was going to talk a little bit more about how I like to establish this feeling on my teams. And so I like to establish shared goals, select technologies that align with those shared goals, create processes that also help with those shared goals, and then be really specific about communicating how those processes are actually serving our goals. And then very classic Scrum Agile thing, being really honest when things aren't working. I think one of the things that often happens in testing is people get very enthusiastic about creating automated tests and getting better at creating automated tests, and are not good at getting rid of the ones that aren't working for them, that are flaky, that aren't actually satisfying what they need. That's how you end up with an inverted test pyramid, is people getting very excited and attached to their tests. And so being really honest when things aren't working, and also creating a space where your developers can feel like they can be very honest with you when things aren't working. Because I also have been in situations where we're writing a bunch of tests, we're really excited about them, we're being very clear with development when they are using terminology that we don't necessarily enjoy about tests. For example, there are cases when they'll call a test flaky even though it's revealing actual bugs. And it's been cases where they are used to UI tests or tests like that being flaky, so they'll just say flaky immediately without even checking. That being said, it can create this environment where they then don't want to use that terminology because they are worried that it will hurt your feelings or something like that. So creating an honest relationship between you and your development team is very important within there. Anyway, so I was talking about creating collective goals, but I think first you need to understand individual goals. So especially since COVID has started, and I can't be with my developers in the room, I've felt like it's been a lot more helpful to make sure that my testers are getting to know my developers as soon as a project starts. So I definitely would reach out and talk to my developers about what my goals are for testing on the project, and figure out what their goals are for the project as well, but also like to make sure that they are interacting with the rest of my testers so that they can start to build relationships with them, so that if something goes wrong or if they have testing questions, they're able to reach out to each other. One of the things that I've experienced that I really hate the feeling, it's like a very sinking feeling when I have it, is when I have feedback for someone and I have not yet had a one-on-one with them. Because I never want my first one-on-one with an individual to be a feedback one-on-one. It feels very uncomfortable to me. So getting on a project as soon as I can, learning a little bit more about my team members. And sometimes I only need that first one-on-one to have them kind of trust me a little and have me trust them, and then learn a little bit more about where they're insecure. Because if we're trying to innovate, if we're trying to create something cool, if we're trying to work together on interesting processes, you need to acknowledge that people are going to be scared of these things for different reasons, right? There are going to be team members that are going to be scared that we're going to run out of time if we add more testing. They're scared that they're not going to get done the things that they want to get done. They're scared of learning new things, because a lot of the time when we're talking about creating these shared goals, we're also talking about shifting the responsibility in a lot of different ways. So we're getting our testers involved in not necessarily helping write unit tests, but helping consult on your unit tests and consult on your testing strategy from the base level. And then we're getting our developers involved in writing our UI tests and fixing our UI tests when they break. And that can make people uncomfortable. So being very clear that you're going to be there with them, you're going to pair with them, is a very important thing for us in forming these really strong, like high trust teams. Yeah, and one of the things that I continue to realize over and over again is you can be on a team where people are new to our company and they're not very gung-ho about testing. They haven't worked with test engineers that want to be their partners. And it takes a little bit to gain allies in that space. But from my experience, having one person who's there who says, okay, I'm going to review test code for you, and I'm going to encourage other people to review test code, can be enough to start making that change and start seeing what the value is of creating these really holistic teams. Cool. Other things I want to point out, you always want to assume positive intent. I know that things can sometimes get a little bit dicey, but that is always very helpful, and that can give you space to approach any process or communication gaps that you're having with your development team with curiosity instead of with animosity. Next, I want you to establish shared goals. So you kind of take those individual goals and that trust you've built, and then you would norm as a team and make sure that the team understands shared goals. You also might talk about individual goals in your norming, but obviously you're going to be less free and have less time to expound within a team norming. And then I always think this is very important when you're developing your test strategy. Yes, it's for your client, but I like to make sure that my test strategy is really something that the whole team has input on and that the whole team has put energy into, that it's something that our whole development team really stands by and really understands and thinks is valuable. Because if that's the case, then they're going to help you fight for that. When you originally decide how you're going to test something, having your whole team both engaged in making decisions and also having agreed to that means that if something goes wrong in your testing strategy, it's not your fault. It's the whole team's collective fault, and then we can iterate on it. It is a learning moment instead of a mistake in a lot of ways. Yeah, one thing to note too is something can happen is that we'll lean on convention and say, this is how we have to test it because we've always tested it this way. This is how many days we need for regression, all sorts of things like that. I think that there's a lot of space to have conversations about why we're really doing any of the testing processes we're doing, what risk it's actually helping us avoid, and how negative that risk actually would be if we were to release that to our customers. So continuously having conversations about that and what is really going to be the largest value add for both you, the team, and for the customer. So what you also want to make sure to do is utilize technologies that align you with your goals. So one of the things that we specifically really like to do at WillowTree is to make sure to use the same tool set for our test code as we do for our feature code. And the reason that we do this is so that we can collaborate together. We also like to store our test code in our main repo with our development code. And this way, one, you can make it so that your test code is part of your definition of done. So if you put up a PR and it doesn't have test code yet, all the way through to your UI end-to-end tests, then you can reject that PR. And it's very clear to tell that it doesn't yet have those UI tests. But also, it goes back to those comfort levels, right? If your developers are used to working in a specific subset of languages, saying, hey, learn this new framework, learn this new tool set, can be uncomfortable for them. And so they're more likely to be okay with helping you if it's something that they feel like they have expertise in. And for me, as a test engineer, because I work on so many different technologies, it's really critical for me to be able to create really solid test strategies to be able to rely on their expertise. So then it becomes this symbiotic relationship where they do code review for me about conventions of their languages, and I do code review for them for testing methodology, for test structures, because test code tends to look very different from normal development code. So there are certain idioms that aren't normal classic development idioms. And so we learn from each other. And so it creates this really positive environment where we really enjoy being around each other and learning from each other, and it's very safe. We also like to, as much as possible, run all automated tests in our continuous integration tool before we merge. This is helpful for so many reasons. One of them just being, if you don't run your tests, they're not helping you. But two, we always like to keep our tests green as much as possible. So my goal for every project that I'm on is making so that my tests are all blocking PRs being merged, so that teams will rally around tests being broken, UI tests being broken, the same as they would rally around unit tests being broken. I do know this opens up a whole can of worms. There's a lot of stuff about how long it takes for your tests to run. There's a lot of stuff about how many resources that takes on your server, on your continuous integration servers. There are definitely concessions that you can make. You could run subsets of your tests. You can have your developers run their tests locally. This is the cleanest way that I've experienced to be able to do this, where we're just having it always run on CI, but you can definitely do this with process. Basically, you're using your UI tests to help you shift left in some ways. How do people feel about this concept? Or questions about anything I've said so far? Is this helpful? Do I seem crazy? Oh my God.
No, that's really good. We always, like, even at Delta Controls, we try to integrate our testing into the CI/CD processes. So it's in various projects, really. So, and that involves embedded project as well.
Mm-hmm. And if people at some point wanted to talk about more specifics with me about this, I definitely would be down to. It's a very general topic right now, but there are definitely a lot of specific experiences that we've had with this, and specific trade-offs that we've had to do in order to make this work or not work, or find strategies around it. So the other thing, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. One thing that I would like to mention on the previous slide about run all the possible automated tests in the CI before merge, I think we should be also aware of the time that our test takes to execute, because if you have like a long feedback loop, probably that won't encourage your developers to run those tests. So yeah, we need to keep it, we need to find a balance, right?
Yeah,
and not taking like 1 or 2 hours or something like that for running our CI.
Yeah, so a lot of, I 100% agree with you. A lot of it ties into working on, I know this presentation was saying, without writing better automation code, but some of that is writing better automation code. So just making sure that it is as slim as possible, but also getting your developers to write more unit tests, getting your developers to write more integration tests, so you feel comfortable with writing just a happy path test in your UI. But there are definitely cases where it does get too long, and then you have to start creating separate test plans or something that runs a different subset of your tests. So it definitely depends what your project looks like, and it definitely depends how slim you can make your UI test suite, because my goal would be to have the slimmest test suite I can, and usually I would want to have like UI integration tests that are mocked, and then have a very small subset of actual end-to-end tests, and those might end up running after merge instead of before merge. So there are definitely trade-offs that you can have, right? Because those full end-to-end tests are going to be more flaky because they're actually hitting the server. So you're definitely right. It's definitely a thing that comes up. Definitely a thing to consider. This is my goal and then you make concessions from that. I also want to talk about just general processes that you can do to help align with the goals we were talking about earlier. Kind of implied from all of the conversations I was having about code review and making your tool set matches up with your developers, but we want to build test automation into the development process. So in some cases, we would be writing our UI tests either in tandem with when the development is happening on the same branch when the development is happening. So they'll be writing their unit tests and we'll be writing UI tests at the same time on the same branch, or we would write it right after or a sprint after. Ideally, you'd be writing it before it gets merged in, because that's when it can provide the most value, because you're likely to get bugs in your code between when you merged in your feature code and while it was untested. So ideally, your UI testing and your automated testing happening as soon as you can before you merge in the code. You know, said before, if it's not tested, it's broken. Not 100% true, but pretty true. So another thing that we do to kind of provide more value to our developers. So one of the things we have is we're creating UI tests most of the time, and we want to be able to let them have them help us with fixing them when they break, using them as information for them, but also when they update a feature, we also want them to update the UI tests, and sometimes we want them to write UI tests, and that becomes something that can feel like a burden for them. So usually what we want to do is make sure that we are providing value of giving them testing information so that they can write better code. So we'll help with unit testing planning, we'll help with reviewing unit tests, they'll help with reviewing UI tests, so that testing is fully covered by both teams throughout the process. And we both feel very confident in the decisions that we're making, so that at no point are we just saying, okay, the testers wanted to add a bunch of UI tests. That's not what's happening. We're making decisions together. And usually we'll want to try to make those decisions as early as possible. So we'll try to be discussing what our test breakdown is going to be in grooming, if possible, and then later, if necessary, hopefully before the work has started, would be when we'd want to decide what our tests are going to look like. So we talked about this a little bit before, having your team rally around any test failures, treating them like they are blocking bugs. So one of the things that can happen is a test starts failing, you decide that it's flaky, you let that flaky test continue failing. If your tests start failing, it's really hard for people to start trusting them again, and you can no longer make them blocking. So the goal is to always, the second something starts failing, you either rally around to fix it, decide that it's flaky and say, I'm going to investigate this later and I'm going to disable it for now, or delete it because it's not helping you move faster, and then start running that test manually again until you can write a better UI test for it, or until you can write a better subset of unit tests to help make sure it doesn't break. Everyone's involved in code review. We were talking a little bit earlier about shifting left, which I know buzzword, everybody uses it. Very helpful though. Testing things on branches is usually what we try to do, both in our automated tests and also in our manual exploratory testing and acceptance testing before we merge to main. That way we can use trunk-based development, and that way we can have a main branch that we always feel confident releasing. It also helps the development be faster, because if there aren't bugs in main, then people don't have to revert changes. We don't have to write as many bugs because they end up happening at the PR state. So there are a lot of things that are really, really nice about this. And yeah, and then also we like to get the whole team involved in regression testing if at all possible. And there are a couple of reasonings behind this. One, if you get the whole team involved in regression testing, then they get more invested in making sure that your automated tests are actual good automated tests, so that they have to do less regression the next time. But also, it lets them know what types of things you're seeing. And if you're at the end of the sprint, and the developers are developing new code for the next sprint while you're doing your regression testing for release, then you're automatically creating a testing bottleneck at the beginning of your next sprint. But if you stop, you get your regression testing done more quickly because you're all doing it together. Then you're not creating a bottleneck anymore, and you're fostering understanding between your team members. You can also do like the short version of this, and have a bug bash, especially if you're about to release a feature, where you all get together and you just poke at the app. It doesn't replace your regression testing, but it does find usually your big bugs if possible. Does anybody have any feelings about these processes that I was talking about? The next thing that I wanted to mention is that the goal is to make sure that people communicate with each other. So openly soliciting code review and test architecture help from the rest of your team. I like to hold test-specific automation and process check-ins outside our normal meetings in order to give the team space to vocalize concerns. Especially once they're getting used to it and when we're all beginning to learn from each other, there can be a lot of growing pains, and sometimes people won't vocalize their growing pains to each other. So creating more spaces where people can disagree with me, where we can disagree with each other comfortably is very important if you're trying to change a process to be different than people have experienced before. Keeping test failures in a visible place. So we were talking earlier about having them blocking PRs, but what you can also do is use Slack integrations to ping the channel and inform them when tests fail. So if your tests do take 2 hours, for example, you can have them run once you merge your code to main, and then you can use a Slack integration to ping your channel as soon as the tests finish running if they failed. So that way you can rally around the change, not as quickly as possible because the code's already merged, but as quickly as possible for that team structure. There are also other ways that you can make sure to communicate test failures as well. Another thing I want to point out is celebrate test wins. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but sometimes, especially when you're first getting teams used to UI testing and when you're first working out the kinks in your test framework on a new project, you might not even trust your tests. You might have really worked through all the bugs where when you see a failure, you actually know that you've caught a bug. And so when you do catch bugs, be really loud about it. And usually I want to find a way to track that. So I'll tag tickets with when bugs have been found by automation so that we can say the percentages of bugs we found that were discovered by our UI or unit test automation. Usually not our unit tests because those can be run a lot faster. But when our UI tests catch bugs, I like to tag them so that we can run the numbers at the end of the sprint and see how helpful our automated tests have been. Cool. We've been talking a lot about Scrum. Definitely want to make sure that we're always iterating. Was talking about the importance of feedback all the way through this presentation, but I definitely want to point out that it's very important that we make sure to be getting feedback from our team, taking retros very, very seriously. I personally love retros. I get way too excited about retros, and I've definitely been on teams where they'll do a retro and then nothing will happen after it. And then that team starts being silent in their retros. So a team that's actually working together to get better needs to be using those and acting upon the changes that have been suggested. So the same thing is true about iterating on testing principles. So making sure that you're having those conversations is very important. And here are just some more like process hints from me. Be willing to remove automated tests and processes that aren't helping you. Find ways to support your teammates if they want to try something new. Your testing process doesn't have to be perfect to be good, and definitely just trying to have more of a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset about what you're doing. Start meetings establishing the shared goals for why you're there. So kind of reestablishing, hey, I'm having this conversation with you so that we can have this goal. And therefore people, like if you do that, people feel more comfortable and enjoy your meetings more, but also can tell you if you've deviated from that meeting, and also are reestablishing and telling you that they think that that's an important discussion to have. And if they don't think that's an important discussion to have, then we shouldn't be having it, because we don't want to be wasting people's time. Was mentioning this a little bit earlier, working to eliminate blame, cultivating ownership, alignment, collective problem solving, pairing more, working together more, all sorts of things like that, getting just one ally, and making sure not to try everything all at once, because there are a lot of different processes here that I've talked about, but also was talking about going to a retro and not doing anything. Coming out of a retro and trying to do everything can be just as detrimental to your team. So wanted to mention all of those. And then my little disclaimer is my team might be different than your team. This approach does require a lot from our teams. It requires team members to be able to push really hard and be really vulnerable and try a lot of new things. But it is very, very rewarding. It is very fun to be able to say, hey, I'm working as hard as I can to make this product better. You are too. We have a very like positive working relationship where we're helping make each other better. It's very, very nice. And this is definitely too much for any one person to do, which is why it's very important to work at a place or start to develop a culture of everyone being involved in their craft, everyone taking ownership over individual tasks, being partners with those that you work with and with your clients, being inclusive of everyone on the team, and having that open communication. And questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Yuri, and talking about team alignment and communication, how important is in-person communication? I guess all of us have been working at least for a while in some kind of hybrid mode, part in the office, part from home. What is the most efficient schedule here? Or maybe put it plainly, how many days a week is most efficient for the team members to come and meet in the office? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what I would call the most efficient. It is a little bit hard working hybridly, at least for me, because we have East Coast offices. And so even when I'm in the office, which right now is every day, but even when I'm in the office, I'm usually in a booth or on video calls most of the day. That being said, it is very positive to be able to collaborate with the team members that I do have here in Vancouver. It's much easier to solve problems together, especially with the East Coast, West Coast problems. That being said, WillowTree as a company has Tuesday, Thursdays as these kind of in-office days, and then every other day is work from home. And I do think that that is probably enough in order to get that spark of collaboration going. I don't think that it is crazy detrimental on the days that my team isn't here for me in terms of working. I think that what becomes most efficient in my mind is just developing norms with your team that you work remotely with on ways to start communication quickly as if you were in person. So being really willing to jump on a Slack call for 5 minutes, or in a Slack huddle for 5 minutes, or giving summaries of what you discussed really quickly in an open Slack channel. Those types of things, I think, really build the efficiency in that don't make up for not being in person, but can be really helpful for kind of closing that gap.
Okay, thank you.
Mm. Thanks for your question. So out of curiosity, was this helpful? Was there anything that people learned, or was there anything that people thought was really confusing or didn't apply to them, or just felt completely irrelevant?
Thank you. It was a good presentation. I really liked it, and I learned a little bit more about how different team works.
Thanks. Yeah. The only other slide I have is if people want resources. These are interns. Oh, I have a question.
So it's my hand that's raised. So a question for you, Lauren. Can you walk us through what the process looks like? Like if a team's starting working on new features, say as part of their sprint, how do you go from taking those requirements or ACs and ending up with basically tests implemented? How is the work performed? Who's involved? Like how does sort of like the analysis is performed, and defining again what should the tests be doing for this particular feature that we're talking about? What does that look like? High level, but like end to end, how would you describe that?
Yeah, I'm going to answer your question, Gordon, then David, I'll get to you. Sorry about that. So the process of getting requirements can be different based on the project. So here at WillowTree, we do have product architects that will often talk with the client and do a lot of requirements management for us. We will also have smaller teams that are more traditional Scrum, where requirements will be gathered and curated by the development and testing team together. So classically, you would get a very general ticket that would come, directly from the client or directly from our developers. Once we broke down the task of what work we needed to do, we would develop requirements together, and then during our groomings or our refinements, we would then talk about what layers of testing we needed for that piece of work. So usually it would be my job or the other testers on my team's job to really raise the concerns, and then it would be the whole team's job to have that conversation. So mostly just like the whole engineering team, and then obviously with help from well, not obviously, but with help from our project manager, and possibly the PO from the client. And then also at WillowTree, we have engineering directors on every team as well, and they talk about big level architecture with the client. So they help us come in and think about what solutions the clients really needed as well. So you have your high level engineering people helping with this and guiding your architecture, and then you also have the whole rest of the team coming with ideas about how we could implement this, what it could look like, and then depending on how structured the team is, you might have more waterfall style requirements not coming directly down, but coming down from your designers or from your product architect. But usually the team gets together and makes decisions around what those tests are going to look like. And then you would also, depending on the client, have conversations with them about how much automated testing you're going to do. Usually when people are hiring us, we are independent teams creating products. Every once in a while, we'll have integrated teams with our clients, but usually we're independent. So they'll have oversight, but mostly if there aren't bugs that they're concerned about, they'll let us make a lot of decisions about how we want to test things. And reporting is very different on different projects. I know you didn't ask that, but it felt relevant to how we're creating good subsets of tests. Gord, did that answer your question?
It answered my question in a different kind of way that I was expecting. So that's interesting in itself. I guess what I was more in mind was like at like a smaller level, like if you're talking saying, okay, we're about to start working on a story, and there's this feature, I got to create some UI, and I know that when I interact with the UI in certain ways, I expect different things to happen. I'm going to start like writing out scenario ideas about like different things that I should be testing or potentially could be testing that down the line could be turned into either an automated test or could be left as some sort of manual regression type thing. The question is more like who's involved in doing the analysis there, because in my experience, it's often driven from the person in like the traditional QA type role, and the developers, they're probably thinking about the happy path or common cases, and I was trying to get everybody more involved, and I found that to be a bit difficult. I was wondering who's involved in your circumstances.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you because of the wind, but I think what you're saying is that you're trying to get more people involved in having discussions about edge cases than just your tester or your QA at the end of the process, and talking about how that analysis is happening. And usually we would want to have conversations about those edge cases and about those test cases while grooming the ticket. So hopefully all of the acceptance criteria, including those edge cases, have been discussed, and we've cut the ticket down to be a small enough sliver that we can talk about all of or most of the edge cases. And then immediately, as soon as that ticket gets put into a sprint, we would probably write our manual test cases, and it would have acceptance criteria about the automated test cases that we wanted for it as well. David, test management tools fit into this process depending on how you want to run your manual test cases. So it's expensive, but I really love it when we get to use TestRail because we would write our TestRail test cases pretty much as soon as tickets were moved into the sprint, and we would write it for all features, including things that we were going to automate. But then we were able to use TestRail's API so that we could run our automated test suite and have it mark tests as completed. So then, as soon as we were done running our UI tests, we would be able to say, hey, we covered those test cases in TestRail. And then if you ever need to remove any of those tests, if they ever become unautomated because they were flaky for some reason, you'll be able to see very clearly that they weren't run when you run your automated tests. So usually we try to create an integration between the two so that it's very easy to tell which ones we have to run manually and which ones we don't. Does that answer your question, David? Cool. Cool. I think we're about at time. I just wanted to plug not necessarily our careers page, but we have our WillowTree core values on our careers page, and I think they're really good and they're very much part of everything that we do. So checking that out, I would love that. And then also if you happen to want to reach out to me or to anybody from the company, feel free to do that. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's it. Unless other people have more questions, but I don't want to keep people longer than they want to be kept.
Thank you so much, Lauren. I definitely think that even though you said like it was a general topic, like I think that you know, a lot of people can kind of relate to some of the things that you brought up. I just want to do a quick last call for questions, or even if anyone has any maybe like tips of their own that they want to share that worked well at your organization, or any kind of last thoughts before we end tonight's session.
Thank you very much. It was really good and interesting. And then I share the approach in my team, and I support you like in full. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. And thank you for being here. And everyone was sharing your really interesting questions and engaging with me on this, because I get really excited about team buy-in just in general.
Oh, hello, hi. I joined the late. Sorry. I just have a quick question about your company. How you guys are doing, because nowadays I mean I also hear from other people too that like nowadays developers are writing pretty much automation tests as well, either UI or API. So and then they, I mean, but pretty much many companies just increase more dev resource, not much QA resource. So, I mean, we are kind of getting, what do you say, like it's not, I mean, doing much less, not much doing much less, not much doing much like automation test script, but doing more manual and also like, I'm not sure like how, like sometimes not getting much value to the, sometimes I feel kind of that way sometimes. I mean, we are definitely putting a lot of value to the team, but I mean, what do you think about like how your company is kind of approaching that? Like how, like in terms of like testing, like responsibility, and what do you think is the best kind of approach doing it?
Yeah, so I would say that that's still something that we are trying to figure out in terms of what we want our testers to become. So I think that there is kind of this movement towards having our testers be more like test consultants. So I definitely have and enjoy writing UI tests and enjoy writing tests, but a lot of what I do is come and consult on testing frameworks and help people get their teams set up for success in terms of their testing frameworks. There's probably only one team, as far as I know, that is doing that completely, where they don't even have manual testers, where they have just one test resource, kind of like me, coming in and consulting on their testing and leading them through even their manual testing. But right now we still have like a 2-to-1 ratio on our teams of kind of these multifaceted manual and automation and kind of process lead testers on our teams. And I don't anticipate us stopping doing that anytime soon. I think it definitely makes a lot of sense for developers to become better at testing, and there's a lot of space for us to kind of morph into this concept of we're all engineers. But I do think there's going to continue to be this need for people really focused on quality, because one of the things that I kind of forgot to mention is like, yes, quality is everybody's responsibility, and it kind of should be everybody's responsibility, but not everybody can be focused on everything all at once. You still need specialties. You still need things that you're going to say, hey, I have this skill. I'm going to be able to direct us towards information in this skill. You don't want a bunch of people who are all okay at all of the same things. That's not a useful team. And so I think that there's always going to be this need for people that are really focused on making sure that your edge cases are covered, making sure that you are having a really well thought out test architecture throughout your whole suite. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're doing, but it definitely does depend on the project, but I don't see us getting rid of our testers anytime soon. And I do think there's also a space for creating kind of that unseen value or that unstated value, because I think that one of the things that I didn't dive into as much is there's a very large need for not just doing your manual testing and then throwing it over the fence, just like we don't want our developers to throw code over the fence at us. taking the time to analyze, figure out what you think is wrong, figure out where the problem came from, so that they don't have to do that. And so you're helping kind of get rid of this idea of animosity. And then that would be something that you would come and teach your developers to do as well if you did have them start testing.
All right, any other last minute questions or thoughts? Well, if not, or if anything comes to you later, definitely you can reach out to Lauren with the contact information she shared, or out to me, and I'd be happy to pass anything along. Otherwise, thank you again, everyone, for taking the time out of your evening to join us. And a big thank you to Lauren for her presentation. And I hope you guys all enjoy your evening. And then I'll post the link for the video most likely tomorrow. So if you want to go back and review anything, or if you want to share the presentation with some colleagues and friends, that'd be more than welcome. Otherwise, thank you everyone very much, and then we'll see you at the next meetup in September.
Thanks, Jessalyn.
Thanks, guys. Have a nice night.
Thank you.